Hi, this is Graphically Alex coming at you with all things fat related. If that's something that interests you, please subscribe. I'd love to have you. Today, we are going to be discussing toxic ritualistic behaviors. I've had a lot of you guys ask me what they are, like as examples, and how to break them and how to get out of it. So, first and foremost, we're going to do some disclaimers. But I have my Pennywise balloon, which we'll get into that soon. First and foremost, this is specifically for the psychological side, okay? This is not about anything physical. This is not about hypothyroidism, PCOS, diabetes, any of that. Anything that would affect your hunger levels. This is not what this video is about. This video is about 100% of the psychological issues that go behind E followed by the letter D, specifically the letter B followed by the letter E followed by the letter D. That's the other disclaimer I want to say. This has more to do with the one where you're eating too much. This is not going to exactly fit with every single type of thing, every single toxic ritualistic mindset, but this is the most common one. And so we need to talk about it. And we cannot talk about obesity without talking about this, especially when we talk about super morbid obesity. It's a major, major aspect of this issue in society. So the other thing I want to say is it's not exactly a choice to have this. This happens because of trauma. I believe there is a genetic component, so it can really carry through families and go from generation to generation very, very easily, each generation getting activated by some kind of trauma. I've seen that happen in my family. I wouldn't be shocked if it happened in yours as well. Okay. The final disclaimers I want to say are really two of them. And that's basically, this video is specifically about you yourself. It can help to recognize it in other people, but it's not exactly offering solutions for how to deal with it when other people still have it. I'm not doing that video at this point. I might do it at another point. But this isn't about that conversation. This is mostly intrapersonal. This is about internal problems. The last thing I want to say is the only advice I have in this video is towards this specific issue. If you deal with this issue and you are still anxious or you're depressed or you have, complex post-traumatic stress or something, if you have some other issue, this is not going to help with any of that. This is about one specific issue, which is tied to behaviors around ingesting. I have to be kind of careful with how I talk. So, very, very specifically, and that's what we're attacking, or that's what we're getting at in this video, okay? Is all the things that usually go into massively overeating from a psychological standpoint, okay? So that's the only solutions or advice or whatever I'm giving is for that very, very specific issue. So anyways, the last thing I want to say is I am not a professional. I am just a survivor. This is me giving my advice. Take what works. Don't take what doesn't. Think for yourself still, okay? But definitely look at it and see what you can take from it, okay? So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about the comparison of toxic ritualistic behaviors and mindsets to Pennywise the clown from the movie It. Do you guys remember that movie? There was this weird, kind of thing that shape shifts, and it was typically in the form of a clown because it liked to scare kids. And it lived in the sewers. And so I wanted to talk about it from that perspective. How does it relate? Well, it's a secret, right? It's something that runs deep. It's something that we don't ever talk about. We never name it either. We just call it It. And we're going to call it in this video, okay? It can appear in many different forms. everybody has different triggers. Every single person has different ones. So this is also an issue that is difficult to have prescriptive solutions for, which is why it remains such an issue. You really have to not want to have this anymore for it to be gone. You can't depend on anyone else to get you out of it. You have to have accountability, self-direction to get out of this, because nobody can watch you at all times. So you have to watch yourself and what you're doing. So you have to want it to be over, okay? Anxiety is kind of similar to fear, which the movie is a horror movie. Anxiety is the center of the entire issue. Sorry if you heard my phone. I need to put it on silent 1 second. Okay, we're back. So anxiety is at the center of the issue, similar to fear, like in the horror movie, okay? So always remember that this is going to escalate in times of anxiety. People often confuse this with emotional eating, but it's actually that the emotions cause anxiety, okay? Traumatic events in your life cause anxiety. Financial issues cause anxiety. Boredom causes anxiety. It always goes back to anxiety. So when we're talking about Pennywise, we're kind of talking about the anxiety that's behind Pennywise. Okay, it's the fear. It's like in the movie when he wants to escalate fear for his own amusement or whatever. That's kind of how this issue survives and lives, is through anxiety, okay? The other thing I want to say is that the qualities of a person and the overall personality traits that I think put somebody at risk are people who are obsessive, so people who are ruminating types of people. For my astrology girly pops, people that are kind of scorpionic, okay? Ugh. You got to drop a Scorpio in you. Ooh, no, I'm just kidding. But for other people, I would just say people who ruminate a lot. You can be extroverted and do this. You can be introverted and do this. It doesn't matter. Obsession is a huge risk factor for this issue. The other thing is being very serious all the time. Okay, so everything within this, it's always life or death to a person that is in it. It is very serious. It's taken very seriously. I chose the name toxic ritualistic behavior for a reason, because the ritualistic aspect of this is so serious to the person who is in it. And you need to understand it, and other people need to understand it is very serious. The emotional pitch of this whole thing is extremely heavy, okay? Is a very, very, very heavy thing that somebody lives with. Okay. So I just kind of wanted to paint that picture, because even if they're like bubbly and laughy and, funny fat friending it, beneath all that, there's a deep seriousness with this. Very, very serious, because the person takes the rituals so seriously. And again, people will have different rituals. I can't say what yours will be. I can give an example later on that's pretty benign, because YouTube gets very upset. So we're going to be careful about how we talk about it, because it is it, okay? So first and foremost, we need to get into the cycle. So when it comes to toxic ritualistic behavior, it is a cycle. Why is it a cycle? Because if it wasn't a cycle, it would be unsustainable. You would not be able to sustain it. Think of the issue like a stool, and there's 3 legs to the stool. If you didn't have one of these, you would not be able to continue to do it. Now, they're not always going to be behaviors, but they're going to be obsessions. Okay, if you are not obsessed with all 3 of these things, you will not be able to maintain the behavior anymore. And you really need to think about that. So the first part of the process is overeating due to anxiety very quickly. That's what we're going to say. We all know what that is. If you're watching this, you probably know exactly what that is. Okay, I don't need to explain it that much, but this is also, we'll get into that later. The second part of the cycle is hating your physical form. That's what we say here. Your physical form becomes a massive obsession. You constantly look at all your flaws and these kinds of things all the time. And a lot of people don't understand, like, people can stare at themselves for a long time, like even hours. Okay, this can be a major, major thing. I took the Sharpie and I drew the Sharpie where I take the scissors, right? That's a part of it, okay? And finally, the last part is we will say unrealistic diets. Very unrealistic. And oftentimes, almost intentionally unrealistic so that they will fail, because failure is also a part of it. But that's why there has to be that aspect. Otherwise, there's no failure to then obsess over, okay? So there's an absolute obsession with stuff. I don't know what I'm allowed to say, but there's an absolute obsession with stuff we buy at the grocery store. Absolute obsession with it. Whether it's what you want, whether it's what you're avoiding, or whether it's what it is doing to your body. You're always thinking about it all the time, constantly. And people don't understand how much people actually think about this. But it can be, especially when severe, it can be to the point where you have virtually no other hobbies or interests. Where maybe you have this and you have watching TV. And that's it. Okay, it can get very, very severe. Where it's just, you can have almost nothing else going on. It's very tough. So under this, I put certain nutrients are very, very common obsessions. So sugar is probably, at least I'd say here and now, like at this time, sugar is probably the number one obsession. So people will constantly be like, I want it, I'm avoiding it, it's doing this to my body. But it used to be saturated fat, especially. That was more like in the 80s, for example, or, in maybe other countries, they view it that way. But these are some common things, because you can even obsess over specific nutrients. So when anxious, you will do one of the three parts of the cycle. So whatever happens in your day, once you're activated and once you're in this, you can be late for work and you'll find that you'll start thinking about it. You can get in a fight with somebody, you'll start thinking about it. You can have minor upsets and you think about it. Okay? You will think about it with any little thing. You'll think about one of those three things. Always. It always goes back to that. Okay? Because that is the coping mechanism. It's a form of distraction. It's a grounding. It's kind of like your version of breathing into a paper bag or doing that kind of like that kind of breathing. That's what this is. Okay? So think about it more in that sense. It's a lot better to think about that way, because then you think, okay, how do I deal? Like, imagine if you were obsessed with breathing techniques. Just obsessed. You were constantly doing breathing techniques all the time. You're constantly looking up new breathing techniques. You're constantly trying other breathing techniques. You're constantly holding your breath. Like, just think about how weird that would be, right? But that's basically what you're doing, okay, with this. Okay, one of the pinnacle belief systems of the toxic ritualistic mindset is a denial of caloric realism. Denial of caloric realism is a major component of the issue. So when we say caloric realism, what we mean is calories exist, and depending on how much you eat of them, your weight will be affected. So if somebody refuses to believe that, cannot see it, just are like, what the? If you say that, it's because their entire way of life is not rooted in that. So what does that look like? It leads to magical beliefs about weight gain or loss. Quote, I have no idea how I weigh this much. I might have spelled that wrong, but whatever. Quote, I eat less than my skinny friends. Quote, my weight is genetic. Quote, it's this specific nutrient that's making me fat. This very specific one, which again, I'll just highlight it. Okay. Exercise only serves the narrative around the issue. It's never done for its own sake. Remember, when somebody is in this, everything revolves around it in their life. Every single thing. So exercise becomes a weapon or something that a person with this toxic ritualistic behavior will use in very insidious ways. So an example of that is doing way too harsh of workouts in order to get injured so you can stop. That is a major one. That happens all the time. We know of people that do that. I'm not going to name names in this, but we know. Saying, quote, I exercise all the time and I'm still fat, therefore I'm supposed to be this way, right? So it's used as an agenda. It's not used just to exercise. It's used to serve what you're doing, okay? And the most common one, quote, I can't exercise because insert excuse, and that's why I'm fat. So it can become the reason that you're fat as well. So that's something you just can throw that out there to somebody really easily and be like, well, I'm fat because I don't exercise. I don't work out. That's why I'm fat. You see, I'm sure you've heard that before. Let's keep going. So one of the biggest gaslights of this is an identification with food addiction. Okay, this could piss people off because a lot of people that have this issue, they really get angry when you say this. I literally was saying this to my mom earlier today and she got triggered. Like she got pissed that I said this. So I'm going to say it. This is not the kind of video that's, I'm going to say the truth. You may not like it. I understand why you don't like it. It's anxiety inducing. I totally understand it because we're getting to the actual problem. And that is the number one reason why people identify with food addiction, because it diverts discussion away from toxic ritualistic behavior. That's the number one reason why. So the reason why you want to call yourself a food addict is because you don't want to talk about the fact that you're obsessed with breathing techniques. Why? Because you don't want it to stop. You don't want to stop. Because why don't you want to stop? Because you feel like something horrible will happen if you stop. You're terrified of stopping. Absolutely terrified because, again, you take it very, very seriously. And I understand that. I've been there. Trust me, I've been there. I have. But we're not going to divert the discussion with your obsession with breathing techniques. You're not addicted to the breathing techniques. You're obsessed with it. There's a difference. Why are you obsessed? Because you have no other way of dealing with your anxiety. That's why. Okay. 2, gives the person the excuse that they are powerless over food, despite the fact that the person will typically be very controlling over what they eat, even crying if they can't get a certain bagel, for example. So this is obviously untrue because a lot of people that have this issue, they will only want specific things, or they will be very specific. of what they will eat. And I don't mean it in a, oh, I have PCOS, so I need to avoid sugar. That's not what I'm talking about. Or, oh, I'm diabetic and I need to stay away from that kind of thing. Like, I'm not talking about like having a physical condition and you needing to adjust your diet for that. Like if you have massive insulin resistance, for example, and sugar makes you feel like you're starving to death all the time. I'm not saying that that's what this is. That's rooted in a physical thing. That's different. Remember, this is completely psychological. Okay? Totally psychological. Completely. Okay? And it's the same thing with, like for me, I'm hypothyroid. I avoid all seed oil consumption, for example. But it's rooted in a physical reason. Okay? It's not a psychological thing. It's physical. So that would be different. That's a different thing. But, yeah. This is used to control other people. Both of these really are. They're meant to get you to not talk about the actual issue and get you to back off the discussion. It's a conversation killer. That's why this exists. It's a way of protecting it. Okay, now let's continue. The next thing is overidentification with obesity. Obesity becomes a core part of the person's identity, which leads to the following beliefs. The belief that obesity is genetic. This is extremely common. A lot of people in mainstream society have taken this toxic ritualistic mindset and made it their own. Remember that if you have a belief of any one of these things, that doesn't mean that you have the issue at hand. It means that you have internalized a belief from somebody who does, if that makes any sense. Which there's plenty of people who do, and they tend to be in industries that are around, this kind of stuff. Okay. But anyways, so that's the number one lie, that obesity is genetic. People will be obsessed with that. They're obsessed. They love it. This is America's favorite lie. It's their favorite thing. They cannot handle it. They are like obsessed. The second thing is getting deeply offended if another person says anything negative about fatness or fat people, quote unquote. So if you're in a room with somebody and they say, oh yeah, I'm not really attracted to fat people, and you like feel it to your core and you're like, oh my God. And you like want to cry over hearing that, even if you weren't even interested in the person or anything, that's a warning sign. I'll put it to you that way. Or if somebody's doing that in your life, that's not a good sign. Constantly projecting themselves into conversations people are having about their own bodies. So if somebody that's not very big says, I feel fat today, and the person is like, or if you're like, that's not a good sign. Feeling an attack on their identity if someone else loses weight. So we saw this like with Adele, we see this with Lizzo, we see this with a lot of different celebrities that have been losing weight, and people feel it as an attack on their identity that comes from an over-identification with obesity, okay? And finally, feeling excluded if something is not in your size. You shouldn't feel personally rejected by that. If you do, that does denote a more serious issue at hand. Projection. Okay, so this is also a major thing. So people that have toxic ritualistic behaviors, they will project onto other people. Part of it is externalizing onto others, which is how I described in my latest video, how people that suffer with toxic ritualistic mindsets and behaviors, they reinforce it. There's like an ecosystem of them because they all externalize too. And it hits that person that has it very deeply. And it's like a cycle and a circle of trauma, constantly reinforcing it through the ecosystem. It's very toxic, but it is very present. And I think that when it comes to obesity, that ecosystem is a huge reason and a huge barrier to getting over this problem. Okay? So let's get into what it looks like from the side of eating too much. Judging other people's bodies and constantly monitoring weight gain and loss in others. So if you are absolutely obsessed with the fact that Lizzo is currently on a downward trend, that could be a projection issue. And what I mean by this, when we talk about judging people's physical forms, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the actual aesthetic, how somebody looks, okay? Whether it's for being too big or too small, okay? So it can go either way. It's a constant judgment from the person. Obsessively telling other people what to eat. This can be a thing too. I've seen this happen a lot. If it's the kind of thing where if you go out to eat, they're upset that you're not having what they're having or something like that. There's a need to try to control what other people eat. It's not good, okay? Assuming that everyone has an issue with the kind of issue where you're not eating enough, okay? So they'll assume that anybody who's thin has that. They'll assume anybody who lost weight has that. They'll go right to it. Telling others that if you say anything about them, you want them to have an issue with the not enough, okay? Even though they already clearly have a problem. I'm going to add clearly to that. But even though they already have a problem, okay? But it's, again, that projection in using the label, which a lot of people do. They will use the label. And you've noticed the complete downplaying of the side where it's too much. You've noticed it. It's almost completely silent. People don't talk about it. And it's because there's so many more people that have that one, so they weaponize the other kinds. And they use it to hide. Okay. That's the biggest thing. And here we go. Denial. Person will deny having this issue at all cost. They run from the topic like a cat runs away from water. Many deny it so deeply they are also unaware that they have the issue. The biggest goal of a person in the thick of it is to keep it a secret. Always remember that. And why is it that they want to keep it a secret? Because they don't want it to change. Even if they say they do, they don't. They're terrified of it changing. So that's why the number one thing is that it's a secret. It's a secret Pennywise in the sewers of your mind, okay? So let's talk about how to get out. Now that we've broken it down. How to get out. Manage your expectations. So depending on how severe this is, it could take years. This could take a long time. For me, it took 6 years. I was very, very deeply in it. I was very severe, deathly severe, not going to make it to 30 severe, okay? So if you're not that bad, it probably won't take 6 years, but it took me 6 years. So that is looking at the expectations, okay? If you take 2 to 3 years, that's probably more normal, okay? If you can break out of it faster than that, that's quick. That's good, okay? There are 2 steps essentially to getting out. 1, white knuckling it by breaking the ritual. 2, dealing with triggers without it. So those are your 2 steps essentially. So the actual steps are not difficult. But I'm sure when I mentioned this one, a lot of you guys felt a shiver go down your spine. And I understand it. So the reason why I say that is because many people often don't know why they do it. And I can't tell you yourself, or I can't tell you myself, but you will instantly know if you stop. So if you don't do the ritual, if you don't do it, you will almost immediately know why you're doing it. Within at least days, at the latest, it would be days, if not instantaneously. So what does this look like? What does breaking the rules look like? Breaking the ritual look like? This is the part that's a little bit brat, by the way, is you don't listen to the rules. You don't listen to the rules of the ritual, okay? You got to be a little bit brat to get out. So let's talk about the popcorn example. So I'm thanking my mom. She gave me this example today. So my mom is currently working on also her thyroid and a lot of stuff. And corn is not the best for a hypo girly pop. Why? Because it's a little bit higher in PUFA consumption. It can lead to insomnia in somebody with hypothyroidism. So it's not the best thing to eat. Is it an evil food? No. No, it's not. But it is something that is typically not on my mom's plan. Okay? So when she is off of it, off the plan, if she has the popcorn, she wants to make sure she has all of it before the next day. That's a ritual. So I told her, I said, break the rules. Don't have the whole thing. Even just leave one. Because it's psychological. So it has nothing to do with physical. It's not like you're not gonna die if you don't have one piece of popcorn. But it will be that little chink in the psychological thing that can get some screws moving and loose. And it can make you be like, so you can start very, very small, okay? But you have to break the rules of what you're doing. And when you do that, you will find the triggers and then you deal with them. So that's really the work. The work of getting over it is dealing with the triggers. So for me, it was like major things like working. I was terrified of working, which is very horrible. It's a very debilitating fear. But how did I deal with that? I got a job, right? I had identity issues. I had to deal with those. I had issues with my sexuality. I had to deal with those. I had issues with introversion, being, cripplingly shy. I had to deal with it. Just had to start talking to people and just get out there and do stuff. And it was horrible. And there were a lot of horrible events that happened. But it's like you kind of just break through all of it. You have to just get through whatever those triggers are. Like, for example, I appreciate being able to use my mom as an example, but hers is boredom. Major, major, major trigger. And boredom can be tricky to deal with because you have to find ways to combat it. And it can be very difficult. So, okay. So that's really where most of the work goes into it, is in that type of stuff. Okay. Many people often don't know why they do it, and I already said that. 1 second. Okay, so let's look at some more advanced examples of breaking the rules. These are more common rules, right? And bigger issues, bigger rules to break. So for one, refusing to obsess about your physical form. So this would look like if you start to spiral, you refuse to engage in it. You don't allow yourself to go there. You say no. You're getting into the shower, you take your clothes off, you kind of glance at the mirror, you start fixating, you shut it down and you just get in the shower and you don't think about it anymore. That's breaking a rule, okay? Not changing your diet every time something bad happens, okay? So this is, you're on some kind of a plan for either maintenance, or you're trying to sustainably lose weight, or you're dealing with some hormonal issues. It doesn't change because something bad happens to you. If something bad happens, you don't allow it to change how your plan is going, your sustainable, healthy plan, okay? You don't allow it. That's a big rule. Big, big, big rule. Can feel like walking on water. But it is life-saving. And I've had the ability to do that. I will never forget, I had so many stresses prior to my breakup. And I had been in the habit of, no matter what the stress is, I'm not going to stop. And so by the time that breakup happened, and it was a very harsh, sudden thing. Very harsh, very sudden. Okay. It hit me like a truck, because it was like this person I had known for years completely blocked me on everything, was basically dead to me in an instant. It was a huge thing, okay? And as you guys know, I got in a car accident the day after. So when that happened, I didn't allow it to change my diet plans. And it felt like I was walking on water. And I had been out of it pretty much. Like, I'd been out of the toxic ritualistic mindset for quite a while, or I'd been out of the toxic ritualistic behavior for a while, but I really expected to relapse, and I didn't. I remember I got up, I went to the gym, I did everything else, because I had planned to go in the spring and lose as much as I could in the spring and summer in 2023, because of my hypothyroidism making winter weight loss so incredibly difficult at a super morbidly obese size. So it was kind of like, now or never. I have to do it. I got dumped in April. I had to keep going, and I did. So that was a huge shift. And to me, it was more so evidence that the cycle had been broken already, but that's what doing that work will do. Okay, is even a very severe or significant trauma or shock, it cannot throw you off the rails. So that's when you practice this with small things, which for me, it was a lot of financial problems, financial stress, anxiety, right? About that kind of thing. More small things. When the big thing came, I had the skill set to not do this. So that you build. Everything is you build, okay? Another major thing is temporarily not pursuing weight loss and focusing on other health goals. This can be major for somebody with this issue, because it gets rid of that one aspect, which is the unrealistic dieting, right? So for me, in 2021, when I officially, the last time I bead was October 2024. We've been about 4 years. October 2020. Oh my gosh. I got election years mixed up. So we've been 4 years, you guys. Took me 6 years to stop, but I've been done for 4 years. But I had to temporarily stop pursuing weight loss because I was so hypothyroid. I really just had to focus on my hypothyroidism for the first year and a half. But I stuck to it, and I was good in the sense that like it got better, and then I could sustainably lose later. But I wasn't in that mindset at all the whole time. That toxic ritualistic mindset, I didn't go there. But okay. And exercising with no expectation of weight loss. I did this in 2022 as well, but this would be a very big breaking of the rule. Okay, these are like bigger picture things, very big. That's more advanced. But saying, I'm just going to exercise to build muscle. I'm going to exercise to be healthier. I'm going to exercise because it feels right? Those kinds of things. Even if I don't lose any weight, I'm still going to continue to exercise. That's major. Okay. Break the 3 parts of the cycle at the same time. So this is my suggestion. You work on all of them. Okay. With your most common things being this. So these are your baby steps and your typical goals. Okay. So refuse to start a new diet. If something happens, refuse. Don't do it. Just stop. Don't obsess about how you look. Don't. What I mean by obsession, you can think about it, but don't like ruminate and take the Sharpie where you draw the Sharpie where you take the scissors and all that. Don't be doing no funny fat friend bullshit. No. Absolutely not. Don't eat because of anxiety, period. Never. Ever, ever, ever. This is one hell of a thing. And at this point, I told you guys, I will never fucking do that again. I even cussed. I will never do it again. Because it is like, ooh, like I get chills even thinking about it. Ooh, no. Okay? So your biggest takeaways. Number 1, embrace caloric realism. Embrace it. It will help you keep a more realistic mindset and realistic expectations. So embrace caloric realism. It is a thing. Only eat for non-anxiety reasons. So these are things like hunger, a holiday, or hormone fluctuation. So hormone fluctuation issues and those with comorbidities. So for example, when I was severely hypothyroid and I had to eat more in the winter because I could not function. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. Or when it's like, it's never because of anxiety. It's because of another actual reason. Does that make sense? It's a physical grounded reason. Why does it matter that it's a holiday, for example? Because the holiday ends. Your anxiety will never end. And hunger is just obvious. Duh. There are times in a deficit where you will be too hungry and you need to eat a little bit more. And it's okay. I mean, it's not a big deal. But don't be like, oh my gosh, I'm nervous about this thing. Oh, I'm going to eat more today. No. Nope. No. But if it's like my stomach is growling and I'm hungry, physically hungry, then yes, that's fine. That's for an actual reason. We'll say only eat for actual reasons. Okay? You don't eat for Pennywise reasons. You eat for actual reasons. Okay? So another big takeaway is forget about an ideal version of you. You are the only you are ever going to be. Don't think about, oh, if I was this or if that or if this or ooh, hoo, hoo, hoo. No. You are what you are. Take it for what it is. Who you are today is who you are. It can shift over time. It is what it is. Your body will shift over time. Don't think about an ideal version of it because it doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. It's a myth. It's an absolute myth. It's chain email logic. It's not real. So don't trip about something that is not real. It never was real. Understand that everyone will require a different macro ratio to stay in a healthy caloric deficit, and there will even be times when you need to adjust it, which you will know because you'll be hungry. So this is important because you don't want to externalize your issues onto other people. So don't fight with somebody about diet. If somebody does better eating low carb, that's fine. Doesn't mean that you have to. If you do better being low fat, that's fine. Doesn't mean other people have to, right? That's not a healthy mindset to have, to be like constantly doing that type of stuff. And it puts a lot of pressure on you, and it can make it easier to relapse. Okay. Okay. And let's talk about remission. Okay. So let's talk about when it's gone. This is where I'm at. So what I will say is, in remission, I spelled that wrong. I don't know. I'm sorry. In remission, you're going to feel like you lost your religion. You could have an identity crisis, but it's a different issue. You could still have anxiety, but it's a different issue. How do you know it's a different issue? Because the behavior isn't there. So the thing about this issue is that it can kill you. Anxiety, it's not going to kill you. An identity crisis, it's not going to kill you. Being bored out of your mind, it's not going to kill you. But those are some symptoms. You are going to have a hangover. I call it the legacy of it. I feel like I'm getting better with it, but as each trigger comes in, I'm able to navigate through it with zero connection to my behavior around ingestion. Zero. So you just constantly find workarounds. Your brain rewires. You start to find other coping mechanisms and other ways of dealing with things, and you'll get there. You will survive without it, I promise. But moving forward, you kind of treat it like Pennywise. So what do I mean by that? It means you make fun of it. You know, when you're out of it, it's not so serious anymore. Don't take it seriously because it's gone. You bully it. You know, I told you guys when I was talking about some of the stuff I was going through in September, where I was having issues with the mirror. And I was like, yeah, like, this is Pennywise. This is clown shoes. This is a red balloon going around. I mean, this is clownery. This isn't real. I know it isn't real. I can even laugh at it sometimes because it's ridiculous. Because some of the things I used to believe, to me now, they're incredibly ridiculous. Incredibly. I just don't even know how I even believed a lot of this stuff, you know. But in a post-toxic ritualistic mindset, you can often feel like you're walking on water because you're doing things that were never possible before, because you had this massive anchor on you. And I would say my biggest advice for remission is stay flexible, because one of the biggest triggers of it is a desire for control, and you have to not be controlling. Because I would say that for most people, that's the root of it, the deepest root of it. And it's probably the part that may never go away completely, because it might be a fundamental part of my personality. But I work with it. I try to channel it into positive discipline. And I don't externalize it on other people anymore. And I allow things to change in life. And I allow myself to change. And I think that that's such an important part of remission, is being flexible. That's the number one thing. Be flexible, be irreverent, be brought. Break the rules for the rest of your life. Don't listen to the rules. They're all BS. And make fun of them if they try to come around, because you don't have to take it seriously, because it isn't serious, because it's ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous. But with that, you guys, I'm going to go. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this explained it. If you guys have any other questions, please comment down below. I will likely either answer them in the comments or I will do another video. But thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys again tomorrow. Peace.